Parshat Vayeshev. So I'm actually going to revisit some things that we've spoken about in the past, and essentially what we're doing today is we're doubling down. That's what we're doing. We're doubling down on certain things. And let's first start with the obvious and perhaps we call it the unfortunate, and that is that we have over here a very complicated family dynamic. Maybe complicated is too nice of a word. Maybe a better word would be toxic. We have a toxic family dynamic over here. And it's the kind of thing that one should think about before they have four different wives and four different firstborn children, and then a whole bunch of middle children, and on top of all of that, having a favorite. So I'm just saying is that without even telling me anything else that happened, there's complexity over here. But I also think that we'd be making a terrible mistake if our entire analysis was looking at a family like any other family, just happens to be the Jacobs or the Israel family, however you want to put it. It's because there is something else going on, which we're going to try to get to as as quickly as we can and identify it. And I'm going to say again, some of it just jumps up at you off of the page, and let's just start reading. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz Meguri, Aviv be'eretz Canaan. So there is a lot of emphasis being put, and it's true. What I'm about, the emphasis is true, and it's important. There is some emphasis on the difference between the first word and the fourth word in the sentence. Vayeshev Yaakov settled the Eretz Muguri Aviv, where his father or grandfather perhaps lived, but the word migure or gar or ger has an overtone of strangeness, that they perhaps were strangers in a land which was not theirs. And Yaakov, on the other hand, settles in a land. And part of this, at least in my opinion, could be a question of numbers. Is that you have Avraham, who essentially Rabbi Soloveitchik, author of Lonely Man of Faith, I heard him once say that Avraham was the loneliest man who ever lived. I also, by the way, heard him say that Moshe was the loneliest man who ever lived. And maybe he even would have said that he was the loneliest man who ever lived. But the loneliness of Avraham would be, just imagine somebody who is the only one who has this belief, is the only one who has this knowledge, is the only one who has this passionate aspect of their lives, and everyone else essentially thinks that they're out of their mind. They think that Avram is crazy. Maybe they think that he's evil. Maybe that they think that there's something terrible about him, and therefore, as much as sometimes we see that prophecy is called a masah, it's called a burden, that knowledge and faith is a burden as well. And Avram is walking around with this all by himself. And you get to Yitzchak again, it's essentially a very, very small nuclear family. But when you get to Yaakov, I'm going to say it again, maybe there's more strength in numbers, but there may be some other things involved as well. And again, without getting too far ahead of myself, right there in that verse, you realize something really interesting. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz Muguri Aviv. Yaakov settles in a place that previously people were strangers. So I'm just saying, right there, it's like you have to notice it and you have to realize it, and it sets us up for the problem, and it sets us up for the fall. It sets us up for as much as you think that this is, higatem ela menucha vela nachala, not necessarily. And Rashi does address some of this. Ela toldot Yaakov Yosef. That itself is also a very awkward start of a sentence, and you don't even know how to read it. I mean, I guess you just trust the trust. Ela toldot Yaakov, Yosef ben Shvasrei Shana, haya ro'eh et achav batzon, uhunar b'nei bilhav b'nei zilpa nishei aviv, yevei Yosef adibatam ra'ah el avihim. So also, please appreciate, we could spend the rest of today just trying to unpack that verse, because it's almost like there's three different non sequiturs that are staring at us in that sentence. Ela toldot Yaakov should continue in a different way. And again, we've discussed that in the past. Anybody who's really intrigued by that, go back and compare this with chapter 36, where it's Ela toldot Esav. Ela toldot Esav who Edom. And then it goes into the women that he married and so on. And it does actually what a normal toldot narrative is supposed to do. A toldot narrative is supposed to tell the story of the family. And over here, it's Elo toldot Yaakov, Yosef. But it continues because it didn't just stop there. It's Elo toldot Yaakov, Yosef ben Shvas Shana. So what does that mean, ro'eh et achav batzon? Did it say what it really sounds like? It says, Onkelos can't tell me that it says what it sounds like. Onkelos will say, ro'eh im echav batzon. He did it with his brothers, but it's not what it says. Ro'eh et achav makes it sound that he's a shepherd for he shepherds his brothers. And I'll say it again, you don't know what to do with that. But it says, v'hu na'ar, and you don't know what the word na'ar means in this context. Na'ar doesn't mean that he's somebody who is, so what choices should we use? Is it somebody who's immature? It's somebody who kids around? It's somebody who's friendly? I mean, what does nar mean over here? Or is he just young? Nar et b'nei. Again, you don't know what the et b'nei bilha, just like you didn't know what et achav meant in the previous part. So I'm just pointing out again, just in terms of the language over here, and what does it mean specifically? Et b'nei bilha, b'nei zilpa, Nishei Aviv. Now, Nishei Aviv is also something which is very easy to miss, and I'm going to come back and show you why we should not miss this. Yosef elavihim, and Yosef brings bad things about them to their father. And one of the things we're going to learn as we move on, the father is absolutely okay with this dynamic because later on he's going to tell him, go check out what your brothers are doing in with their flock in Shechem and come back and tell me about it. Which, by the way, sounds like absolutely confirming everything we've said. They are shepherding the flock, but he is shepherding them. I mean, that's just exactly what we're reading over here. We read as the text develops along the way. But also the shift over here between B'nai Bilam and B'nai Zilpa specifically being mentioned over here. And on the other hand, by being told that Vayevei Yosef et Dibatam Alavihim, who did that go on? Is that back in the beginning of the sentence, Ro'et Echav? Is that all of the Echav? Is just the last group that was mentioned? I'm going to say it again. This verse is a very challenging verse. And the only reason I'm not going to double down and try to unpack it is because of the next verse. Apparently, almost every year when I teach this, I ask the same question. So some of you haven't heard it, so I'll ask it again. So does it say that Yaakov loved Yosef more than all the other sons? And everyone always says, of course it does, but it doesn't. Because what does it actually say? Yisrael ahavet Yosef mikol banav. So why the shift? Why do we just now go from Yaakov to Yisrael? And the continuation of the verse is equally difficult. Ki ben zakonim lo, because he normally would say the son of his old age, but he's not. He's got Binyamin, and he's got a bunch of brothers who are more or less the same age. V'hu asalo ktonet pasim, and he made from ktonet pasim, and that also takes us to another place, and that is what exactly is a ktonet pasim, and what is the significance of it, what is the meaning for it. So let's stop everything and explain what is actually going on over here. And as I said, a lot of this I've been through before, and very soon we're going to start moving in perhaps a slightly different direction. The Ketonot Pasim, moving backwards to the Ben Zekunim, moving backwards to Yisrael Lahavet Yosef, all of those things, all of those elements, three elements in that verse, which is why we skipped the previous verse really, all of them point towards the same thing. It doesn't say Yaakov loves him, it says Yisrael loves him, which means at least our working hypothesis here should be that we're dealing with a national identity as opposed to an individual identity. That Israel is the nation, Yaakov is the person. So had it said Yaakov loves Yosef more than his other children, then it would have said, oh, look at that, Yaakov plays favorites. And I'm going to, again, be very clear now. Not everyone will agree with what I just now said. In Midrashim, you can find those who attack Yaakov for it, but there's another part of it. And that is the way that this is then going to be distilled by the other children. The other children may not see this as a more national issue, but they may see this instead as a personal issue. Again, the personal issue is very easy to build up the argument, to build up the case. There's a certain way of looking at the world and saying that as far as Yaakov was concerned, there was only one woman that he wanted to marry, and that was Rachel. And by extension, there was only one son, maybe two, that he wanted to have, and that's Yosef. And all the others are part of Yaakov's extremely complicated personal life, where he ends up getting tricked into a marriage and then he gets forced into other marriages. And yes, it's not exactly a shotgun wedding, the other ones, but Yaakov essentially did not look to get into the situation whereby all of the other children that are over here were produced. That was not something that Yaakov looked for. That was Yaakov's life is complicated. And to say that Yosef was the favorite because he favored Rachel, all that that's then telling us is that, yeah, we had this complexity already, you know, one generation earlier in terms of the wives, and Rachel was favored. And just like Rachel was favored, Yosef is favored. But on top of that, there's something else. There's something about Yosef which is actually reminds us of Rachel, and maybe it's the outward beauty, and maybe there's something else to it. But we also have to admit something, and that is that every single person, other than his immediate family, every single person who meets Yosef along the way is blown away by him and wants to put him in a position of power, wants to make him in charge. And Yosef is apparently somebody who's incredibly impressive. By the way, now if you deal with some sibling rivalry, that's not necessarily going to help you, because again, what happens if you are the CEO of a company and you're very successful and you have a whole bunch of kids, and one of them is most and best suited to become the new CEO, and all the other ones are not as well suited, and you choose that son to be in charge. So on the one hand, there's going to be jealousy. On the other hand, they can say, you know what, this is a good thing because we all got stock in this, and we're all going to make a lot of money. But they can't get past this thing about Yosef because, and I'm going to say it again, Yisrael loved Yosef. By the way, the other thing is the Ben Zekunim. Onkelos over here tells us Ben Zekunim is because Zaken not as elderly but as wise. Yosef was a wise child, Ben Chacham, that he loved him because of his wisdom. And yes, everybody loves him because of his wisdom. Everybody puts him in charge. Potiphar's house, prison, Paro's house, Yosef is the guy who always gets placed on top of everyone else, and in Yaakov's house as well. But in Yaakov's house, there's a bunch of brothers and family dynamics, and why are you being chosen, and why? Oh, it's only because he loved Rachel is why he's choosing him over here. But there's a background to this which I haven't said yet, and it's the background which I want to talk about, because then everything is going to open up a lot more. And that brings us to the third thing in that verse. This whole verse is the verse that tells you what's going on, although admittedly it's easy to miss this because we can miss everything and anything. Over here it says he gives me Ketonat Pasim. Ketonat Pasim is only mentioned one other time in Tanakh. In case you in case you in case you don't know what it is, then you should feel inadequate, because Rashi points it out right over here, and that is that it's used in terms of one of David HaMelech's children, and we're told that it's royal clothing. By the way, just generally in terms of history, things that were of certain colors did belong to the royals, and there were certain colors that were prohibited for lay people to wear. Part of the background of wearing tzitzit with tchelet actually would give an indication that all Jews are royalty. That we are, sorry, you look at me and say, all Jews, it's all men. Like, what's the matter with you? I see that look. And 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 the concept of the tchelet is the confirmation of that you're Mamlechet Kohanim B'Goy Kadosh. And or at least as a minimum, you can also move in the direction of, specifically with tchelet, to move towards it's used all the time together with the Mishkan and with the clothing of the Kohen. But again, even think about Mordechai, they put the tchelet on him and so on. Colorful clothing went together with royalty, and there were actually considerations as far as who was allowed to wear certain colors. Over here, the Ketonat Pasim, in my mind at least, again, I'll tell you there's two possibilities, but one of them is right. The two possibilities is that Yaakov is already designating Yosef as the Bechor to become the one who will be the Kohen to work in the Mishkan. That's a very frum and the focused way of saying it. And then there's the other way of saying it, is that Yosef is being chosen as the king. and that's the correct way of reading it. And the reason why, and you can say to me, how can you say it's the correct way? Again, you can find various commentaries going in either way on this, and you'll ask me, so why would I say it's the correct way? Well, obviously, it's my biased opinion, but that's part of what we're going to see as we go further. But in order to really understand this, we'll need to go backwards a little bit also. Yeah. But he doesn't get the kingship in the end. Oh, damn, you just ruined the whole thing. You can at least say as a spoiler alert. I mean, you know, I'm sorry. Okay, never mind. You just ruined the whole book. I don't, if anybody wants to leave now, I mean, you can. Uh, so all that you're pointing out is that you've been here before. And second, right? Second thing that you're pointing out is Vayeshev has a surprise ending. But let's Yaakov was wrong. He thought he was going to be king, but he was wrong. Again, yes, yes, and yes, and yes, and that has nothing to do with what's going on right now, right? Right now, he just gave him the royal clothing, and let's try to go. Let's try to go a little bit further. Again, there's a lot more in this that hopefully we'll come back to some of it. If you look at source number 2, it's a Midrash Hagadol. At the very end, it says Nishei Aviv Shayu Shkulim Ki Imahot, that Yosef actually had 4 mothers now, or 3 mothers. See, that's part of what I need to stress. There's another reason, which, and this is a mistaken way of looking at things again, but it's, if you want to overly analyze in terms of the personalities and the individuals and and again the tragedy and trauma which is taking place, that would be that Yosef is also an orphan. Yosef only has a father. So for the father there to treat him differently than the others actually may have some merit to it, because everyone else has Yosef has a brother, but his brother is much, much younger. At this point, if Yosef is 17, then Binyamin is 7. So a 7-year-old brother is not exactly the same as everyone else has a whole group of, of people to be with, and Yosef is isolated. So I can say that Yosef is isolated and all alone. So it's interesting over here, Nishei Aviv. So this midrash reads it as Shayu Shkulim Ki Mahot. On the other hand, this Seichel Tov, and all I'm going to say about this is, I think he had a bad day when he wrote this. Again, first of all, contradicts what we just now saw, and he writes, Nishei Aviv Imam Haya Mitgareh Kesavur Shebnei Pilag Shimhem, that he would pick on the children of Bilhah and Zilpah because they were children of only the Pilag Shem. Now, first of all, what I want you to know about this is that actually there's other midrashim that said the exact opposite. I mean, and again, this is going to get us more into the realm of politics. I don't know anybody here may be interested in politics, but how are we supposed to look at the various sons which exist? First of all, just the numbers: 6 sons of Leah, 2 of Bilhah, 2 and Zilpah, and then you have 2 sons of Rachel, Yosef and Binyamin. So, as far as Yaakov is concerned, you can easily say that he has 12 sons, and that's all. I'm going to try to prove this point. That's it. The 12 sons. But even there's 12 sons, they're not necessarily all equal, because Yosef was just now placed on top. So now, how do you look at all of the others? There's every reason to believe that Bnei Leah, who are the largest faction, and they have 6, again, power numbers, that they may have every reason to push below the children of Bilhah and Zilpah as being less worthy, and therefore, essentially, what in their minds you have the real wives, Leah and Rachel, 6 versus 2, where they outpower and outflank, and eventually they can get rid of the competition if they want to. Again, that's also a spoiler alert over here. You can get rid of the competition if you want to. And then the lower ones, Bilhah and Zilpah, they don't really have a say in this. Now, the reason why this itself was so interesting and so unfortunate is something that we're going to see later on. I'm just saying we're coming back to this. Don't stay there. Rashi takes us to this strange place, and again, I am not revealing what we're talking about yet. But Rashi in source number 4, and this is going to be number 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and all of them are going to take us to the same place, and that is that Yosef is essentially being attacked. This is just so incredibly politically incorrect. But you know what? Rashi could be politically incorrect if he wants. The Midrash could be politically incorrect if he wants. There is something about it which is intellectually satisfying on a religious sense, and there's also something very unsatisfying. The thing which is satisfying is that Yosef goes through a lot of suffering in his life. So essentially, I can say that he goes through suffering in order to build character. He goes through suffering in order to become Yosef, or he goes through suffering because somehow he deserves it. And over here, this whole approach is going to blame the victim and is going to say that essentially he deserved it. And again, just go back to Dina, right, in last week and say, yeah, essentially Dina deserved it. Do you realize? And by the way, I'm not even saying you can't find Midrash and they're going to say that, but do you realize how bad that really is to go in that approach? By the way, it's very popular to do this in your line of work in terms of Israel. Israel they deserved October 7th, right? Essentially, it's the exact same thing. It's taking the victim and blaming the victim and saying, no, the victim really had it coming to them, because for certain people that becomes very politically and religiously and ideologically satisfying to them. But it comes from a place which is of evil and of cruelty. And therefore, we don't love this approach, do we? I'm just saying it's interesting how this has now become on a completely macro level. And I assume you agree with me on that completely. Over here, where are we going to begin in source number 4, V'hu Na'ar. So I pointed out that it's possible that Nar is immature. I can also say that he used to chill out with these kids. He used to, which means again, if Bnei Bil and Bnei Zilpah are being ostracized by Bnei Leah because they're the real sons and they're not the real sons, what does Yosef do? By the way, this is great and it's terrible at the same time. It's great because it shows you character of Yosef, and it's terrible because of what price he's going to pay for it. What does he do? He lifts up the downtrodden. He lifts up those who are being pushed down and says, no, I'm hanging with these guys, and gives them, therefore, automatically much more status and much more credibility. And therefore, he kids around with them, he plays around with them. Now, that's how I would have read it as Pshat in source 4. Rashi writes, Vunar, Shioseh Ma'aseh Na'arut. He was very immature.
Rabbi, the word lehitlael in Hebrew, isn't it the same thing there? He's evading, he's separating himself, sort of.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it's the same word. I accept that it is, but I'm not sure exactly what to do with it. But it means to divest yourself of something. What I will point out, though, just in terms of the syntax of the verse, where it says over here, "V'hunar et b'nei bilha b'nei zilpah." So whatever this na'ar is, it's together with b'nei bilha b'nei zilpah. And now what Rashi just now did, "V'hunar," he made believe that it's not there with Bnei Bila Bnei Zilpa. Look what he did. Gunar, arut. He acted in an immature way. Mitaken b'sa'aro, would fix up his hair. Mimashmesh be'inav, I don't know exactly what he did with his eyes. Kadesh nira yafeh, that Yosef tried to look attractive. By the way, Yosef was attractive. Why did I have to look at? So I don't even know what to do with this. Then at Bnei Bilhah, Klom of Regilit, so Bnei Lafisha Yochim Vazinotam Vahumi Karavan. So you look at those two different parts of Rashi and essentially say, what in the world just now happened? Because one seems to have nothing to do with the other. And it's not what it said. Vunar Bnei Bila Bnei Zilpa. So therefore, the second comment of Rashi is exactly the one that I articulated a moment ago. That these are the kids who have a lower social strata. So what Yosef tries to do is he tries to reach out to them and he tries to help them up in order to help they're standing in the family. But that first part saying, oh, now there's this impossible immaturity about Yosef. Later on in source number 5, where it tells us Yosef Yafeh Torah V'Yafeh Mar'eh. What's the next verse? The next verse is Eshet Potiphar. She looked up and she saw him. By the way, I think if anybody has lots of time in their hands, they can look this up on OUisrael. I have over 1,000 lectures there. I don't know what we're up to. We're getting close to 1,300. And I think the one that was listened to or downloaded the most was the one that I called "And Here's to You, Mrs. Potiphar." So it just goes to show it's all about form and not about content.
Is that apologetics for the brothers being so much? In other words, I know the rabbis Chazal likes to say give a lot of reasons why their words for putting it, putting it, they're trying to get.
No, we're blaming the victim here. We're absolutely blaming the victim. But give me a second, and we're gonna see where this comes up a number of times. Over here it says that Yosef was Yefei Torah v'Yefei Mar'eh, and next verse is, oh, Mrs. Potiphar, she cast her eye upon him. By the way, I spent all week, every day, I free chat GPT and I asked for an image. Show me an image of Mrs. Potiphar grabbing at you. I can show you like 6 different images so far that I have of this. I have a Renaissance one. I have one like from ancient Egypt and so on. What they would produce as an image of this? None of them are good, by the way. They're all bad. I had to remind Chat that he was 17 and that she was much older, but at least in my mind. Anyway, if it fits with Mrs. Robinson. So coming back over here, Rashi in source 5, Yosef Yifei Torah, Kavan Shiratz Moshel, once he was put in charge, Hitchil Ochil Vishoteh, he started eating and drinking, he raided the kitchen, Umasel Selbes Sa'aro, and he goes back to this point, and he did his hair, Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu, God says, Avicha mitabel v'atam mesalsel b'sarecha. Your father is mourning for you and you're doing your hair. Ani megarebecha et hadov. I'm going to send the bear after you, which means you're going to, and then miyad, by the way, that's the end of Rashi. Miyad, saying dot, 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 and then she comes and she attacks him. In source 6, Yosef ben Shvas Shana, this is the Medrash Rabbah, where this is coming from. Vat Omer v'hunar, el shaya osem ma'asen arut b'mashmesh be'inav mitaleh ba'akevo. Rashi left that out. It seems to be he walked in a haughty manner. Mitaken b'saro. So this is also interesting. One of the things that it says over here continues in that midrash, and it says that he would bring the dibara'ah. You, Yosef, told his father that his brothers are checking out the local Canaanite girls. By the way, if that's what it actually is, it's actually true, because Yehuda then goes and marries a Canaanite girl. So I don't even know what to do with this. So therefore, Yosef tells Lashon Hara about that they're checking out girls, and therefore his punishment is that she then goes and checks him out, which and accosts him, attacks him, and so on and so forth. And again, all of this is absolutely 100% victim blaming, so embrace it. In source number 7, Amar Rabbi Ami, Ein Yitzhara Malech L'Tzdadim Ela Be'emtza Paltia, Ub'Shah Shorei Adam B'Mashmesh Be'inav U'Mtaken B'Saro U'Mutleh Ba'akevo, Hu Omer Hadein Didi. This is a general comment back in Parshat Bereshit, when the Yetzer Hara sees somebody acting in such a self-absorbed manner, who Omer Hadein Didi, he's mine, which means I guess the first step towards falling to the Yetzer Hara is giving in to certain extent of self-absorbent, and what word did he use? That was a good one. Vanity, vanity. We like vanity. I mean, we like the word. Good. And again, source number 8, which is a midrash there, but he saw Eshet Adonav, L'chein anshe levav shemuli mahi amunato shel Kodesh Baruch Hu kipo el adam yesham lo. Again, what's going on in the background? What is God doing? Rav Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, but he saw Eshet Adonav v'tineh maksiv l'mala man yani Yosef yefeh Torah v'yefeh mareh. What did it say right beforehand? Look how attractive Yosef was. And it's Ligibur Shaya. It should have said here, Mashal Lamad Davar Domeh. This is considered like Ligibur Shaya Omeid Bashuk, Mamashnesh Be'inav, Matakein B'Saro, Motlei Ba'akevo, Omer Li, Na'ali Ya'i, Na'el Gibor, Omer Le, Iat Gibor, Iat Ya'i, Haduba Kamach Kum Kipachena. Same exact midrash. I'm just saying it. It's time after time after time. Two of them about Yosef, one just generally, but using the same terminology, that Yosef essentially is full of vanity, according to this, self-absorbed, and therefore God says, okay, let's see how you're going to get out of this one now, and therefore he gets his various punishments. And I'm going to say it again, all of this right now, we have no idea what to do with. So let's put this as another thing on the side, and then we're going to come back to this. We're actually going back to 19th century approaches today, and that's like one big solution for everything, right? That's very 19th century thought. If you know that, then good. If not, also good. Big problems, big solutions. Source number 9, Rav Yosef Kra, not to be confused in any way with Yosef Karo. The Rashbam is actually going to quote this and say, wow, that's really good. Separate issue completely. Here we're back when Yaakov says to Yosef, go down to Shechem and see how your brothers are. So again, exactly what I said before, that Yosef is roa et achav batzon, and the father asks for, what is going on. So he articulates a problem. Hello, achicha roim b'Shechem. Why does Yaakov send him? Lefisha nityarei Yaakov mibanav. Yaakov was afraid for his kids. Shalichu atzon b'mar'eh sham Shechem asher haragu zechuram. That's the place that they killed a whole bunch of people. Amr Yosef alacharecha roim b'Shechem ulasham haragu kol anshei ir mityarei ani min yoshvei haaretz. Yaakov says, I'm afraid. By the way, that's just so interesting. I'm not sure what Yosef is going to do for them. I'm not sure, let's continue that a little bit in source number 10. I'll say one more thing about this. If you look on the bottom of that, Yosef Karo, there's a note that says, leave that a second. In source number 10, he quotes the Rambam, the Rashbam as saying, "B'makom sakana shargu anshe hamakom zeh shamatim of Yosef Karo chavereinu v'hanali." He quotes this comment and he says, and I really like it. So the Rashbam also adopted this idea. Mipirish Rashbam zal. V'lo yashar be'inai. So this is already somebody who's much more recent. He says, I don't like it. She'im hu makom sakana. So essentially, what is going on over here? So this issue of Shechem, by the way, we just now moved, if you're not following, we just now moved to an issue of geography. Why Shechem? Because it's part, I'm going to say it again, it's actually part of the same issue, but we don't see it at all yet because we're just looking at little pieces. And as I said, there's one larger issue going on. I would have answered very simply, why go to Shechem? Because Shechem is a place that we actually own the property there. It's a question of real estate. Look at source 11 of Vayo Yaakov Shalem, Ir Shechem, Asher Be'eretz Canaan, Bevo Mi Padan Aram, Vayichan et Pnei Ir, Vayiken et Chelkat HaSadeh, Asher Natasham Oalo, Miyad B'nei Chamor Abi Shechem, B'mea Kisita. And again, if you didn't realize or remember this is the end of Perek Lamed Gimel. Perek Lamed Daled is what happens once they're there. But over here, they actually buy some of the property over there. They're landowners by Shechem. So therefore, why of all places would Yaakov's children go to graze in Shechem? Because we own property there. So therefore, if you're concerned with any of the locals being upset with you, so I'm saying that was my easy solution. So I just had to look and to find someone who said it. I did find it in source 13, but I'm just saying you can go for him or not go for him. I was just looking because I felt someone had to say it. So finally, somebody said it. But on the other hand, and maybe this, and you could take this either way. In source 12, it's a really great verse. Vayis'u vayihi chitat elokim al ha'arim asher sivivoteim v'lo radfu acharei b'nei Yaakov. The translation which I found for this, as good as any other, as they set out, this is after they leave Shechem, a terror from God fell on the cities round about, so they did not pursue the sons of Yaakov. Which means, why were they safe? Because God intervened in order to protect them. By the way, that also is really interesting. Is God actually supporting Shimon and Levi? This is my post October 7th interpretation. I'm sorry, a whole new commentary after October 7th. Is this God supporting and approving, or is God being more pragmatic and says, listen, I need Bnei Yaakov around, otherwise the story ends a little prematurely. So you could decide whichever way you prefer. But I will note that Yaakov, at least in Bereshit, doesn't argue in terms of morality. Yaakov argues in terms of pragmatism. We're small in number, they're great in number, what's going to be with us? But he doesn't say what you did was morally wrong. That's also interesting. The other thing is just a present for some of you. The why this is not serious. I have to warn you when I'm not being serious. Why did the brothers insist that they all go through a brit milah before they killed them? So the real answer, you would say, is in order to weaken them, in order and so on. But that's not the real. The real answer is that they converted them to become Jewish, because who's going to care about a bunch of Jews who were killed? There'll be no UN investigation. Anyway, it's a present for you. You can use this whenever you think it's politically expedient. If you don't use it, I also understand. Okay, let's try now to unpack some of this. I want to skip and I want to go to source 16. Source 16 goes back to the issue of Yaakov sending him to Shechem, and why, as soon as there's Shechem, we should all get a little nervous. No, look, today, if somebody would say to you, listen, I'm going to go to Shechem today, so this may not be the best place that you want to go to. So in source number 16, we find that the Gemara tells us as follows: Vayelech rechavam Shechem, ki Shechem bakol Yisrael hamlichoto, tanu mishum Rabbi Yossi. It's really interesting. Rabbi Yossi is the one who's speaking. Yosef, right? Rabbi Yossi. Tanu mishum Rabbi Yossi, makom mizuman leparanut. B'Shechem, it's a place which is set up, as it were, for painful behavior. B'Shechem, inu adina, she was abused. B'Shechem, machru echavet Yosef. By Shechem, Yosef was sold. B'Shechem, nechlaka malchut beit David. And by Shechem is where the kingdom was divided. If you go back to source 15, Rashi over here, he says a couple of things which are interesting. And again, one could spend the whole day on this Rashi. First, Rashi says that Yaakov accompanies Yosef when he sends him, and he sends him Emek Chevron. So Rashi asks, Velo Chevron Bahar. Shenemar Velu B'Negev Yivu Ad Chevron. Ella me'etza amuka shel otot tzadik hakavur b'Chevron. L'kayim shenemar la'avram bein b'tarim ki ger yer zaracha, and so on be'eretz lo lahem. Essentially saying is that Yaakov sending Yosef, whether it's beknownst to him or not, is the beginning of the fulfillment of the Brit Bein Abtarim, which means they're going to go into a land which isn't theirs, which means you think you're sending Yosef northward, you think you're sending him to Shechem, you think that things are going to work out one way. Somehow God is going to turn things around. He'll meet an anonymous man in the field. Even though his brothers have gone to a different place, they went to Dotan, he's going to find them anyway, and they're going to send him right back. And then they think they're getting rid of their brother, but what's going to happen? A little karma is going to happen, and they're going to all end up in Egypt as well. God's going to make a famine, and so on and so forth. They're going to end up in Egypt, and then all of their children become slaves, and then hundreds of years later, we're going to be able to get out of Egypt. But that's meaning the Brit Ben Abtarim is happening now, and that's what Rashi gets into right here at this point. There is a divine hand which is guiding what's taking place. Now, if that wasn't enough, Rashi then continues and says, "Vayvo Shechema," right in the same pasuk, "Makom muchan leparanut, sham kilkalu ashvatim, sham inu adina, sham nelchaka malchut beit David, shenemar v'yelech rechavam Shechema." So you realize that Rashi is telling us the same tradition that we just now saw from the Talmud, but the truth is that now we're a little bit closer to understand the larger issue which is taking place, and that issue is kingship. And that question is, who will be king? And now why that's a question at this point is what I still need to show, and we need to get back to that Rambam, but I'm not quite ready to go back there yet. Let's first move over and look at again at source 17. 117 for real? No, we don't want any of those right now. Let me just think what we want instead. How we want to do this. Okay, we'll do it the way that I put it on the paper. I'm going to say it again. That the issue over here is who's going to be king, and you can ask me why is that an issue right now. So I want to get now a little bit of focus and a little bit of big picture because we tend to always lose big picture and we tend to look at literal things. Like one of the things that happens is, again, I don't know how we always learn Chumash or we did learn Chumash or we do learn Chumash. Sometimes we get hyper-focused on words, on letters, on sentences, on chapters, on aliyot, on episodes. And we don't necessarily see the bigger things. But thematically, there's something that has happened 3 times in a row, and we completely ignored it, I think, as a theme, because maybe we just didn't realize it and didn't see it. In source 17, which again is Perek Lamed Gimel, and this part is easy. Esav turns to Yaakov, and this is what we did last week. Esav turns to Yaakov and says, let's go together, let's travel together. And what's Yaakov's response? Yaakov's response is no. Which means, in a certain sense, there is an offer and there's a possibility of Yaakov and Esav reuniting and joining forces together and being one family, one clan, one group, one nation, and so on. Of course, we know the reason why this is not going to happen is because of the prophecy that Rivka receives, which Yaakov apparently inherits, and Yaakov instead defers and no, you go on, we'll catch up and whatever. If you think a second now about source 18, which is the next chapter, chapter 34, what are we told then? We're told that we have the story of Dinah and Shechem. And what happened there? They say these people will live together with us. We'll marry their children. We'll marry their children. And there's also some, it's not always completely honest. Let's look a little bit about this in source 18, pasuk tet. V'tchatnu otam benotechem titnu lana benotenu tichu lechem. Again, we're going to marry, which means we're going to become one nation. V'itanu teshvu v'aretz tiyeh lefnechem shuvu uscharu v'achazu ba. And you, by the way, the Jews, what's your role going to be? By the way, this is such wonderful anti-Semitic tropes. You guys can be traders. Right? You'll be involved in trade. You could have also have said, you can own land. It's one of the things that didn't always happen. As it goes on, we're skipping a little bit. They tell them to go and have the circumcision. And then we'll be one nation. That's the offer on the table. They come back, meaning Shechem and Chamor come back and tell their people, these people are shlemim, they're honest, they'll live with us. ויסחרו אותה, ורצינו רחב ידיים לפניהם, את פניהם ניקח לאנשים, ניתן לנו, אף בזאת יתו לנו אנשים לשבת איתנו להיות לעם אחד, וימול לנו כל זכור כשני מולים. מקניהם וקניינם וכל בהמתם, הלא לנו הם, אף נעתה להם וישרו איתה. And if we do this, then we can take everything which is theirs. Again, it's just staring at you. But what's the offer on the table over here? Again, that's what they say among themselves. But what's the offer on the table? Become one nation. So I'm going to say it again. If I were to have asked you before, what does chapter 33 and chapter 34 have in common? It's both the same theme that we should join another nation and become part of them. If you paid attention to source 19, which is right before that, it's Perek Lamed Aleph. That's where Lavan, that's a separation from Lavan, where Lavan also says, right, Habanot Benotaiva, Benim Banai, Vatson Soni, V'kol Shetera Elihu, which means essentially what does Lavan want? Lavan really wants them to stay there as well and to be one nation. But again, this is this journey that Yaakov's on. The journey is to become a separate nation. He leaves Lavan to go back to the land of Israel because that is where he will become a nation. On the way there, he gets stopped by Esav. No, let's join together. No. When he gets there, someone else, come, let's join together. No. Which means, I'm going to say it again, How easy was that to miss that this is the theme which is taking place? The theme is nation building. The theme is this emerging people, which I'm now going to call Yisrael. Yisrael is emerging out of everything that we're looking at over here. And because each one of these episodes was dramatic unto itself and was important unto itself, we kind of missed the big picture and see what is really taking place over here across the way. And that is, again, if I had to label this, the emergence of Yisrael, which, by the way, doesn't even have a name yet, but now at least perhaps we can see this a little bit better. In source 21, which is Perek Lamed Hey, where does Perek Lamed Hey come? After Lamed Gimel Lamed Dalet, which, yes, that was pretty obvious. After the Esav temptation and or possibility, and after the Shechem, again, theoretical possibility. So God comes and appears. Can I say this again now? This is not only nation building, now we're naming the nation. And he says increase in numbers and so on, and all of that is clear and we're used to it, and we've heard all of this before, which is why you kind of get lazy. No insult, unless you're actually sleeping. And it's the next word, which was so easy to miss. Umilachim mechalatzecha yitzern, and kings will emerge from your loins. That was a quite literal biblical translation. Kings will emerge from your loins. If you're Yaakov Avinu, how in the world do you process what was just now said? And I'll tell you how all of we process it if you paid attention to it, and you even noticed that God said that, because I don't believe God said this particular thing to Avram or to Yitzchak. I'm pretty sure that he never said this. That now something new has happened. Now they're Yisrael. Now they come back. Now they have numbers. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz mugarei aviv. There's something different. And then Yisrael Ahavit Yosef, which means, going back to your observation when you try to ruin the whole class before, that Yaakov's first thought as far as who is the one who is going to be this king, who is going to take over next generation. You can't leave a vacuum of leadership. You can't leave it, in a chaotic situation afterwards. Somebody has to be appointed, because we are not just a family, we're more than a family. There's something else that has to take place over here. And this word over here, that kings are going to come out, I am going to tell you again now, this has been the theme for everything which we have seen before. Everything that we have seen goes back to this one word, and then we could perhaps understand this a little bit better. Which means you're getting the land is going to be called Israel, the people are going to be called Israel, kings are going to emerge from this. Continue, because it gets really good now. Now we have to tie up some more of the loose ends. In Pasuk Kaf Aleph, we're still in source 21. Vayisa Yisrael, right? Israel travels. That's different from all the other travelings, because it's always been Yaakov. Israel travels, which shouldn't be so surprising, because now they're called Israel. V'hi b'shkon Yisrael ba'aretzahi, when Israel dwelled in this place, v'yelech Ruvain, v'yishkavet bilha, pilegesh aviv, v'yishma Yisrael. And that's the middle of the pasuk. What's the continuation of the pasuk? V'hi b'nei Yaakov shnei masar. So, and then not only Bnei Yaakov Shnei Masar, then we have our division: Bnei Leah, Bechor Yaakov, and it breaks it down. Bnei Rachel, Yosef ben Yehuda. Bnei Bilha, Shivchat Rachel. Bnei Zilpa, Shivchat Leah. El Bnei Yaakov Asher Yulad Lo B'Padan Aran, which is a little surprising because it included Binyamin just now. Nonetheless, I don't know if you really followed what I was saying. First of all, and this we've discussed before as well, Ruvain is trying to do something which is similar to what Adoniyahu does later on. He's trying to stake a claim by taking his father's Pilegesh, and therefore to claim that he is the rightful heir. We're already now talking about a nation. We're already in the land. We've rejected these other nations who've tried to join with us. We will be a separate people. And Ruvain now is asserting his rights as firstborn and saying, by the way, in his mind at least, and saying that I am taking her. But it's really interesting that he calls her Pilegish Aviv, and you could actually defend some of this because what does it say afterwards? Right afterwards, it calls it Shivchat Layan Shivchat. Now, just because it's Shivchat Bilhan Shivchat Layan Shivchat Rachel doesn't tell you what their status is. But what did it say about Yosef? Unar et bnei Bilha bnei Zerah nishei Aviv. Yosef treats the children of Bilhah and Zilpah as being wives of the father, having full status. Well, Reuven is the, remember I read a medrash before I told you he had a bad day? Well, Reuven was the one who treated Bilhah as if she was only a Pelegish and therefore chattel and therefore property and he could take it and therefore he's flexing his muscles over here. And what happens is that Yaakov completely rejects this. And which means I want to read that verse again. Vayhi b'shkon Yisrael ba'aretz hivech Reuven nishkavet Bilhah Pelegish aviv vayishma Yisrael v'yu b'nei Yaakov shnei masar. And that's great because you know what Yaakov just now did? He did the opposite of what others would have done. And be honest for a second, if we're actually capable of it. Are we capable? What Reuven did is worse than anything Yishmael did. I'm just saying, can we be honest about that? He did something worse than, I know, we can then use the Midrash, the Gemara, the cover up. He didn't really do it. He just moved, right? He moved the bed. That's all. Come on, just read the words a second. I would believe so. The bigger problem is that a Pelegish, it's actually machloket whether it even applies. First of all, before Matan Torah, it's not bother me. Second of all, the Rambam is of the opinion, and this is really important, that a Pelegish is only something which is the right of a king and no one else. Because we're going to come back to a kingship, because that's what all of this is about anyway. Because once you're a nation, then the leader becomes the king, and the whole thing over here is about the king. But do you realize what Yaakov did as opposed to Yisrael? V'hi b'shkan Yisrael ba'aretzahi, and Reuven takes the Pelegish Aviv Yishma Yisrael. That is an act of him trying to wrest the kingship for himself. V'hi b'nei Yaakov shnei masar. What does Yaakov do? Yaakov does not kick him out. Yaakov does not send him away. Yaakov still has 12 kids. Because in a nation, some people are going to mess up. In a nation, some people are going to be bad. In a family, maybe it can be insurmountable. I don't know. But this is not a family. This is a nation. Do you realize now how significant it is later on when Yosef has a dream and he sees 11 stars? Because Yosef could have, imagine if Yosef had a dream and said, I saw 10 stars there. You know, Reuven maybe should not be considered part of this family anymore. So I'm saying it really is significant that Yosef has inherited his father's outlook, whereby there's 12 sons. That's what it is. There are 12 sons. Bnei Yaakov Shnei Masar. And even though Reuven did some, and the very next verse, he's still Bechor Yisrael. He's just not kingship material. Reuven Pachas Kamayim Al Tothar Ki Alito Mishkei Avicha Az Chilalti Yutzi Allah, and so on and so forth. That's the quote unquote blessing that he gets. So I guess the question at this point is where do we go from all of this? Let's just point out again in source 22, it emerges a second time. That's Perek Lamed Vav, and of course Perek Lamed Vav comes right after Perek Lamed Hey, which was after Perek Lamed. Okay, I hope you're on to me on that. Ve'ela hamalachim asher malchu be'eretz Edom lifnei meloch melech lifnei Yisrael. Guess what the subtext is over here in Perek Lamed Vav, which comes right before Perek Lamed Zayin. And what happens at Perek Lamed Zayin? That's this week's Parshat Vayeshev. When what are we really talking about? The Melech in Yisrael. That's what we're talking about. That's what the topic is over here. So now we got a bunch of things to try to finish up, and obviously we don't have time to do everything I wanted to do. So if I want to go back to that Rambam for a moment, one of the things that's in, I'm looking, I don't know. Source 14. One of the things about a melech is hamelech mistaper b'kol yom. A melech needs to take care of his hair. A melech needs to look good. 1 second. Was that at least 1 second? Was that at least interesting now? Did I just now with one half a sentence just now change everything? Right? Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm saying that is so important. If you want to continue a little bit more over here, it says, you know what else it says about a melech? Again, the Rambam I do not believe is opened up to Parshat Vayeshev as he's writing this, but look towards the end of that source. He says, Ro'eh kareo katev, and what is he called? He's called the shepherd, which means when he's Ro'eh tachav batzon, what is a king? A king is a shepherd. L'rot b'Yaakov Amo, and he quotes a verse about Yaakov. V'darko shorem u'foresh b'Kabbalah, karo edro, yirab zero, yikabet tzla'im, u'v'chiko yisa. That what is a king? A king is somebody who's essentially a shepherd. Now I'm going to tell you again to go back to that verse and read that verse and say, okay, so what's really going on over here? So I keep on insisting what's really going on over here is to understand what has happened to leading up to this point. Pay attention to Perek Lamed Aleph, that was leaving Lavan. Pay attention to Perek Lamed Gimel, that was leaving Esav, the temptation. Pay attention to Perek Lamed Daled, that's where the whole story, where Shem, again, the possibility of joining. Look at Perek Lamed Hey, where God says, no, kings will come out of you. And then again, in Perek Lamed Vav, where it says, oh, before there was a king in Israel. Meaning, how many times do you need this to be pointed out until you actually get it? So now just a couple of more things. Part of being a king is also the ability of deciding who will live and who will die. So I just want to suggest a couple of more things, and then we'll stop. King has life in their hands. Even this whole halacha that you make a bracha when you see a king, it's only a king that actually can have somebody put to death. It's life and death in their hands. So just try to put some of this together and to make sense of some of this, I want to point out a midrash which, I mean, also we're going to not necessarily know what to do with. Look at source number 28. Vayoma Yehuda el Echav. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. By the way, did you like that before? It was Amar Rabbi Yossi talking about Yossi, and now it's Amar Rabbi Yehuda Bar Elai, who's talking about Yehuda. But one day I will write about this because I have hundreds of examples of this. Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli. By the way, he is the famous Rabbi Yehuda, one of the 5 students of Rabbi Akiva. Bishvach Yehuda katav medaber. Bishloshim makamot diber Yehuda b'nei Achav v'asu oto melech aleihim. Yehuda becomes king because of these 3 speeches that he gives. Vayomer Yehuda el Achav, vayavo Yehuda ve'achav, vayigesh elav Yehuda. Now, I found this really interesting, maybe on purpose, maybe by accident. Whoever did this edition of Medrash Rabbah, 2 of the 3 he gave you the sources for, and they're both in Perek Mendalid. That's during the time where Yosef is already in Egypt, and then there are negotiations taking place, right? But it skipped the first one. It didn't tell you the first one. And the first one to me was the most interesting because look at source 20. It's also the first one. Look at source 29 because it's in Perek Lamed Zayin, which is long before Perek Mem Dalid. Vayoma Yehuda el Achav. That's what it was talking about. Ma betza ki naroget achinu v'kisenu otamo l'chuvenim kerenu lishmaelim v'yadenu al tiyebo ki achinu b'sareinu v'yishmayachav. Yehuda deciding who will live and who will die. Don't kill Yosef. Sell him over here. And you could have said that's the worst thing Yehuda did. And look what that midrash just now said. No, that's Yehuda acting as king. Why? Because that's what kings do. I'm just going to add as a somewhat of a postscript to this that there's also, I continued last night after I sent the sources and I collected some more. And it's really about Yosef and the baker. Later on, when the wine steward is going to come in front of the king, and this is ready next week, he's going to say, and I want to be very, very careful with the words that he says, that there was this kid, Vayikasher patar lanu ken haya, oti heshiv al kani va'oto tala. That Yosef determined that I would live and he would die. That is Yosef very much acting like a king. And by the way, the Gemara says it like I said it. Rashi moves away from it. You look at the various Rishonim, they don't know what to say. How can this guy say this in front of the king of Egypt who really can't decide who will live and who will die? But I'm going to say it again. You actually see now that Yehuda acts like a king. And there's more. What I was going to get into a bit also would have been the whole story with Tamar. And, kill her. No, don't kill her. This is a king behaving and doing the things that he's doing, which means essentially when you pay attention over here, the question now is, so who's going to be king? And then you have Yosef moving next week. The brothers are going to come back. Will he let them live or will he kill them? Will they live or will they die? And I'm not saying, I know we get caught up in the drama of it. And as we get caught up in the drama, just like every other episode I pointed out till now, we get caught up in the drama and then we miss what the real story is over here. The real story is who's going to be king and how is this going to be determined. And now you know there were 3 candidates. One has become disqualified, and that's Reuven. And now there's 2 more candidates, and one is Yosef, who is the first pick of Yaakov, and the other one who emerges out of, and you don't even know how he emerges from all this, and that is Yehuda, but Yehuda is acting very king-like, and that's what the Medrash picked up on. He's acting very king-like, and now all that we have to say is, wow, this is really interesting. I sure wonder how all this is going to work out. Class is over. So you tell me. Yosef is king. Yosef is king. The only issue is he's not the king of the Jews.
That's it. But Yaakov was looking for who's going to be.
Yeah, and Yosef was most capable, but they were not able to accept him as king.